That was interesting. Thank you, Pete, Pamela, David, Karis, and Lee.
I definitely want to be around for the sequel to that one. That was very provocative. This year, the Global Fashion Agenda, in collaboration with their strategic partners, launched the first ever CEO agenda for the fashion industry, which spells out the most crucial sustainability priorities for fashion leaders for a common industry focus on sustainability.
In this next session, we will explore how industry leaders have put these priorities into practice. We will learn why sustainability has been made a strategic priority in their organizations. You will get some practical direction from their experience and from their insights in the 2018 Pulse Report. Please welcome Caroline Chalmer, COO, Global Fashion Agenda.
Hi. Listening to the debates and panels throughout these last 2 days, I couldn't help but notice one recurring theme: complexity. It's one I recognize from discussions that we at Global Fashion Agenda have had with many of you over the course of the last year. Discussions in which we've touched upon how to make sustainability an integral part of the way we do business in the fashion industry today. Our version of putting a man on the moon. In these discussions, it's become clear to us that for many companies, even getting started on sustainability is incredibly difficult, in particular for the smaller companies who don't really know where to start yet. For others who are a little bit further along the curve and a little bit more progressed in their efforts, we've heard that there are larger challenges, such as how do you actually implement recycling at large scale, or how do you even begin to address the wage question, that are challenges that are too large or too difficult for any one company to tackle on their own. And essentially what we've heard is a call for guidance. It's a call for leaders to set a common and clear direction for the industry, and a call to unify efforts, combine them and channel them in a common direction. So that's essentially why we've brought together a group of leading fashion companies, giants of our industries, and through multiple negotiation sessions over the course of the last year, we've brokered a common industry agenda of sustainability priorities. It's a single universal point of reference on what matters most in sustainability today. It's designed to provide guidance, it's designed to provide clarity, and it's designed to focus industry efforts on the topics that matter most. The CEO agenda outlines 7 core priorities. 3 priorities in the short term for immediate implementation, and 4 deeper-rooted priorities for more fundamental change. You should all know which 7 topics I'm referring to by now, because this entire summit has been designed around those 7 topics. But for those of you who haven't been paying attention, I'll just briefly summarize. So, first and foremost, we need full supply chain transparency. This is certainly easier said than done, but without a clear understanding of how products are made and what impacts exist along the supply chain, it's very difficult to make any meaningful changes. Second, we need to achieve efficient use of energy, water, and chemicals. This is a low-hanging fruit for environmental and social impact, in particular in the processing stage of the value chain. And last but not least, we need to have respectful and secure work environments for every single person that's employed along the supply chain. And this is quite simply a business imperative. So those are the 3 short-term topics that we encourage every single fashion company leader to work on already today, if you aren't already. And that should be the first place to look for those of you who haven't really started yet. For those of you that are a little bit further ahead, a little bit further along the curve, we've outlined 4 priorities where we know it will take us a little bit longer to see results. Either because we lack the solutions that we need to make change happen here, or because we lack the infrastructure or the collaboration mechanisms that are needed to make change happen. The first of these 4 priorities is sustainable material mix. It's still unclear which materials will allow us to produce with very little or even no negative impact. So we need an innovation push to develop those materials. Materials that are recyclable, materials that are biodegradable, or materials that simply are less resource intensive in production. Next, we need to move towards a closed loop fashion system. So everybody knows that way too much of what we produce today ends up in landfills. We need to change that. We need to design for disassembly. We need widespread collection of used clothes. And we need to find ways to turn that waste into new fibers and new clothes. We also need to promote better wage systems on the social side to remedy some of those institutional failings that are making it hard to see the way forward here. The fashion industry is a major job creator, especially for women, and we've got the power and the scale to influence those wage-setting mechanisms and make them better for the future. Last but not least, we should anticipate and prepare for the effects of the 4th Industrial Revolution. So we're in the middle of it right now. We just heard that the robots are coming, and we need to do some serious scenario planning and work together to prepare for the transition of workforces at scale. So these areas should really be the focus for collaboration and innovation by those leaders who are a little bit ahead and who've already started on their sustainability journeys, and who essentially hold the power to make systemic change happen. Speaking of making change happen, I'd like to introduce you to the people who've shaped the CEO agenda together with us, the strategic partners of Global Fashion Agenda, and our next panel. The panel will be moderated by Thomas Tochtermann, who's chairman of the steering committee of Global Fashion Agenda. And with us today, we've got Daveu of Kering. We've got Rick Darling of Li Fung, Baptiste Carriere-Pradal of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Gedda of H&M, and Guggemos of Target. Please welcome them. Take it away.
Thank you, Caroline, for that wonderful introduction. And, well, thank you for being still here for the last panel. I, at some point in time, have to discuss with Jonas why I'm always ending up in the last panel. Keep the energy, it's worth it. I mean, we're recapping the CEO agenda with the companies and the individuals that really know the CEO agenda and that really can share deep insights that are hopefully something for all of us to take away. So I always enjoy these discussions with the strategic partners that have shaped the CEO agenda with us as well. And I don't want to give any more introductory words. I want to spend the time on you, with you. And Baptiste, why don't we start right away with the first short-term lever, the first short-term topic, supply chain traceability, and you give us a bit of your perspective.
Yes. So supply chain. So there is a few questions regarding supply chain traceability. Indeed, first, what should we be tracing about it? So we know that as everything, nothing comes out of thin air, and everything has an origin, comes from either a factory or a field. We could virtually trace everything if we were having either the capacity or the means to do so. But therefore, in an effort of efficiency, the idea is definitely to come and narrow down the topic to trace the key things that one needs to trace. Virtually coming back on tracing tier 1, tier 2, which means that virtually having information regarding social and environmental performance of at least your first tier in your supply chain. That will be indeed the first step before going to the lowest tier, where we know there is so much of an impact. But at least that's the basic of all of the work that one should be able to do in order to move forward.
And what can you provide on specific tools from an SAC perspective to get going? Because, I mean, there are so many companies that would like to trace, but they don't know how to.
Yes, so virtually what we provide as the Sustainable Apparel Coalition is more or less the infrastructure to enable traceability to take place. As we've talked a lot about transparency, we know that traceability will be the main element that will allow later on a transparency effort. But first, to allow a brand to be able to know the environmental and social impact, we provide a tool to do so. That means that we undergo a long and very interesting process to make sure that all of the participants of the coalition can align about what type of information they want to receive from their supplier, may that be around the environmental performance or around the social performance, so they can receive back this information. And then they can all do that through a common platform that we call the HIG.org that enables all manufacturers and brands to make that efficiently, meaning that once such an information is traced by one member, virtually if another of our member is also sharing the same factory, they can also have this information. So it's really the questionnaire, virtually, the platform, and all of the things that goes around that we are providing to enable and faster transparency.
Be honest, how easy is it?
Nothing. Nothing is easy. But however, today, in today's world, to have visibility on your tier one, that's something that is definitely manageable without too much complexity. And because we have everybody that has agreed on the common set of questions to ask to the manufacturers, that's something that definitely makes the journey easy, because you don't have to repeat the type of information that you want to collect. So it's by doing this common effort that you can make sure that you lower the complexity of doing such an effort. And such an effort is not only valid for a brand that wants to have information towards its manufacturer, but also eventually that can be happening for retailers that wants to have information of a brand where a similar process is happening.
Thank you. Marie-Claire, how does Kering measure sustainability and specifically sort of trace the supply chain of your many brands?
So first, we are using a tool that it's called, but I'm sure most of the people here know, I hope, our EPNL, that is the Environmental Profit and Loss Account. Our idea beyond creating this kind of tool, it was the fact that we wanted to know all our impacts to be sure that we will be able to reduce our environmental footprints. If you don't know in details where your impacts are, you are not able to build a key program. So that's why we decided to create our environmental profit and loss account. It's a tool to measure not only in our own operations, but also in our entire supply chain. And it gives you a monetary value. So it's also very useful to speak with CFO, with CEO. So at the same time, you have a powerful tool to measure and with a common language because you speak with euro and with dollar. And something very key to share with the audience, because it's true for all the textile industry, we see that the most important part of our impact, so over 90%, were linked with the supply chain, and only less than 10% in our own operations. So it means over 90% link outside our legal boundary. So because we think that it was important, we open source our EPNL methodology. And we think also it's linked with the traceability, and another concept very important, it's transparency. And we think that with this tool, we give transparency about our impact because we put on our website our results, but it's also a way to measure our progress. So we can see every year if we are making some progress or not. And after things that is happening, you know, when you are thinking about consumer, we say that consumers are asking questions about traceability because they want to know where the raw materials are coming from. They want to know how the products are made. But I think as businesses and also as a company that we want to push, it's really important to understand all our impacts on the planet, and not only to speak about one thing, but really to have a 360 approach. So in this way, for us now, for our CEO inside the brand, but also for François-Henri Pinault, we try to have a look at our classic PNL, and near our classic PNL, we have our EPNL. So it's also give us a tool to identify our priorities and to build efficiency also in our programs. And I think, and I stop, I would like to share with the audience, is the fact that when you are thinking about investors, they are really happy to have this kind of way to have some key data from the company. Because if you are speaking about risk management for them, it gives them a way to understand if the company is resilient or not with climate change, biodiversity, and many other issues.
How long did it take to build such a sophisticated, I must say, system up? I mean, that you don't do overnight.
To build it, and it's not finished. So we began to work on it as a pilot project in 2011. We were able to publish our first EPNL group in 2015. And as you can imagine, we continue to make some progress because, of course, the quality of the data is key. So it's a lot of work with the suppliers. But after also, when you are speaking, for example, about diamonds, precious stones, semi-precious stones, you need to continue to work with NGOs, experts, and also consultancy to be able to really measure the environmental impact, because the data in this kind of tool, it's key. So we have something very strong, we have something very solid, but we will stay very humble that we will continue to work to make some progress. But if I make the comparison with the financial accountability, you know that it took centuries and it's not finished when also we see what it's happened with the financial accountability. So I'm so glad.
That's good. That gives us hope on that front. Another element sort of on the agenda, the second topic, is efficient use of water, energy, and chemicals. Julie,
sure.
How does that look like at Target? Where are you putting the emphasis?
Well, first, before I answer that, for those of you who don't know, Target's a mass retailer in the States, and we have 1,800 stores, a rapidly growing online business, and product categories from diapers to furniture to apparel. And so the impact that we have around the world and the planet is massive. And we are incredibly passionate around this topic and the topic of this two-day conference. And we're making really good progress, and I just want to say we're not perfect. Somebody had mentioned that earlier today. We're not perfect either, but we're here to learn from some of the best and collaborate and have discussions that will make things easier for all of us. To answer your question, we have some very aggressive plans in place for both efficient use of water and chemicals. Just quick highlight in regard to chemicals, we're the very first retailer in the United States to set an approach forward, a vision to take a look at all chemicals within our products. Transparency is key. Management of those chemicals is key. We have restricted substance lists that we're starting to build by category, starting with beauty and personal care, moving to baby, toys, and so on, to ensure those chemicals are not in our products. And then in regard to water, we had WWF come in, the World Wildlife Fund, and they did analysis of our entire supply chain and helped us zero in on areas where we need to improve raw materials, both growth and production, manufacturing of our products, and then building operations. And so we have an aggressive goal in place to improve our water usage as well.
And how many of these solutions that you're implementing are your own, dedicated, developed by you, for you, and where did you steal with pride from others and sort of achieved similar results?
Good question. Two of the big ones that we took from the market, partnering and joining ZHDC, or I might have got the acronym wrong, Zero Discharge, Hazardous Chemicals. We joined in partnership with them to ensure our factories meet their highest level of standard. And so we have a 5-year goal in place for that. In regard to chemicals, a little bit of going out on our own limb there, because there wasn't a lot of work happening in the industry, and so we really led the charge there back in 2013 and took advantage of a beauty summit and set some goals on chemicals that we want to make sure are out of our own brand products and national brand products. So there's a little bit of both. We are not afraid to take what's already working and applying to what we're doing.
Very good. Yeah. And do you make your solutions available for others?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's
a declaration right now.
That's often sort of the misconception. There doesn't seem to be any competition on those solutions. I mean, people are free to ask and people are free to share, and everyone is willing to share. I don't know, Rick.
Well, Rick, I would say Rick and I were at lunch yesterday with you, and I'll let you chime in too, Rick. But we have the right people here in the room and at this conference. And how do we leverage and pool our resources and minds and tackle some of the biggest issues together, because it's not really about the competition, it's about doing good for the planet. Go ahead, Rick, if you want to add.
Oh, in effect, I was just going to add the entire CEO agenda is really doesn't have a competitive component. There's not one issue on that agenda that companies are competing on. And so everyone's doing a lot individually. And we had a conversation today about, wouldn't it be great to take 15 retailers that can make impact without a big organization and just sit down and address them one by one where we can agree and get things done. So I think, if anything, what came out of this meeting versus last year, I think is that kind of attitude now. I think people are ready to do things.
Yes, yes. Why don't you go on sort of the secure work environment and safe work environment as well, and what does that mean for Li and Fung? I mean, you're touching so many factories sort of in the world. Sort of how do you prioritize there? So what changes are you trying to achieve on that topic?
Okay, I think actually the way we look at the human side, which is really what we're talking about, is the same way all the companies are looking at it. It really is the priority. Environmental issues are critical, and we all know that. But we have to be very careful that the social side and the human side don't take a back seat to part of that. And I don't think most of the good companies actually do. I think for us, it's the definition of what a good job is globally in the various countries. We produce in 60 countries roughly, so it's pretty diverse. And there's all different levels of regulation and obviously wages and everything else. But we try to look at it from the perspective of what is really a good job. And the very first thing we look at is safety and environment. Prior to anything else, people need to be able to go to work in a safe environment. You have to be able to go see those factories to be able to determine that. It's not something that you can get from a report. So in our view, whether you're a small company, mid-sized company, or a big company, at least your tier 1 factories have to be visited by management of the company to understand what's really going on. So part of it has to do, obviously, with making sure that the workplace is safe. And that includes chemical storage, warehouse and fabric storage, along with fire, electrical, and structural things that I think we've all learned a lot about in the last 5 years coming out of Bangladesh. It has to ensure that the people are being respected and that there is some mechanism for management and the workers to be able to communicate with each other. And that there's a great variety of the quality of that depending on countries and whether there's a union involvement in a country and whether there's union involvement and the workers and management have been educated to properly do it. So that we think is a big component. And then of course there's a wage component. So these workers are there to build futures for their families and be able to develop an ability to have a fair and reasonable lifestyle. And so I think you have to look really at all three of those components. But I think from a Li and Fung perspective, we've kind of taken the position that it doesn't matter what you're paying someone right now. If they walk into a building and it's going to collapse or it's got a fire hazard or whatever, that's the primary thing that we try to secure.
Thank you. Anna, how does H&M approach the work environment topic?
Well, I think I can only echo a lot what Rick was saying there as well. But I mean, work environment or human rights issues, I mean, that's very much the core of our sustainability work, I would say. That's why we started 20 years ago. And I think that has really helped to shape the industry during the past couple of decades. And it still very much is. And I think sometimes we're stuck in this thought that nothing has really changed over those 20 years, but I think it really has. I mean, if we look into our supply chain now, we can see that, I mean, not least the supplier's mindset quite different than what they were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. We see much better improvements and performance on compliance, for example, and we also see that, I mean, we are tackling a lot more complex issues than what we did back then. 10 or 50 years ago, it was all about like the basics, where do you have the fire extinguishers? And today we try to talk about issues like fair living wages and discrimination, for example. So I think a lot has happened. In terms of priorities, I mean, we have pretty much the same as you mentioned there, Rick, as well. It's about having safe working environments, that you have good social dialogue, that you have wages and so on. What we think is very much at the core of that is really the putting the worker at the center and empowering them to be part of actually shaping the working environment. So I think what you were mentioning there, the social dialogue, that's very much the core for us as well. And I think that's really the key to address whatever topic you want to work on when it comes to the working environment, whether that's chemical handling, whether it's wages, overtime, whatever. It is really about putting the worker in the center, empowering them to be part of shaping their working environment, having a proper dialogue with the management and making sure that they're properly represented by their fellow workers. So I mean, we have a social dialogue program. I think many other brands have as well. And I think it's really fantastic to see how that has grown from being like a pilot to a project to a program that today is covering more than 400 suppliers, or sorry, 400 factories and more than 600,000 workers. And the fantastic thing is what you see happening within the factories, that thanks to the dialogue that you have, those quite complex issues are being brought up onto the table. And I think that was impossible 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, very reassuring to hear. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on the right side, on the more fundamental change sort of topics. And sustainable material mixes is the first one. Baptiste, it would be interesting to get your perspective on it. Sort of where are we on sustainable material mix? Is it clear what is the material mix? So how can we measure it?
Yes, those two things are clear. What is the material mix and how to measure it? Those two things are clear. What is a sustainable material mix is not yet there. It's still a quest, and if we were having something, we could all sing a kumbaya, there will be no more. that would be already a savior. But indeed, we know that to reach a real sustainable material mix, there is a lot of R&D which is needed, and there is why there is so many investment which is made into finding circular element. There is why there is Fashion for Good, which is also trying to find solution to that. So whatever we can say today, which mix is more sustainable than another one. For that, we have done the research, and for that, we have the material for that. And this is a journey we have embarked now for many years. So earlier today, Eric from Nike was mentioning about the Material Sustainability Index. And virtually what happened is that around 2014, indeed, this index was handed over to the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, that then allowed, with all of the participation of all of the other members of the coalition, to bring it to make sure that there is even more material in it, and to solidify the data so that we ended up with robust data to be able to evaluate how sustainable every material is. So if you go to this platform, which is actually publicly open for any designer or anybody to go and evaluate the material A, is it more sustainable than material B? This is possible to do today. And it's done in such a way that echoes a bit something that also Stella McCartney was mentioning earlier, that maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it was more easy. You were able to say what element of the material you could change to have a more sustainable material. And now when you will be able to see all of the complexity of the information that comes into the evaluation about how sustainable is a material, for the type of dyes that are used, coming back to the DAC mention that you made, to even the type of gauge of the knitting machine, which has a direct impact on some elements. And you can actually play on this database with all of those to come with how sustainable or what's the performance elements or the material sustainability index of this element. So therefore, we are in a position today to already provide a solution, which is open source, so to really go and to do this work to prepare to move to a more sustainable material.
And are we moving enough to the mix?
Oh,
is the mix becoming more sustainable?
The mix is moving, so the mix is moving in a good direction. Are we moving fast enough? We're never moving fast enough, and you always wish that the movement was stronger. And that's at least what we see definitely, is that the investment into the research is definitely growing at a much faster pace, and that we've seen that. So 3 years ago, I think, you launched the award, and then after there was more movement that came around that. So we definitely une lame de fond, I forgot this one. So we definitely see an industry movement towards generating more sustainable material. So this is moving, and now we definitely need to see more transition towards how can those innovations which are being created, how are those elements which are put to the market can have a better and quicker uptake, so that we can all make sure that we can move towards indeed this more sustainable mix ultimately.
Yeah. Are you working with the material mix laid out here, where your priorities at Target, Julie?
I think we need to work together on this, but you know, for us, what we're doing is focusing on raw material platforms that are sustainable. So we're looking first and foremost at forest products that was mentioned earlier by Stella. So both rayon and viscose, but also paper, as you think about toilet paper and stationery, polyester and cotton. And cotton's interesting for us because right now we're moving toward more sustainable cotton. Organic cotton is amazing, but there isn't enough in the world to supply what we need, given the scale. And so we're working with the Better Cotton Initiative to help farmers take chemicals out of the manufacturing process to make a safer cotton. And then just a fun fact, we have a moonshot initiative. We partnered with NASA and put $1 million toward what cotton growth looks like in space. So it's really interesting when you think about water utilization in a microgravity environment. I'm not an expert on it, but we threw a challenge out to the cotton industry. We got all these different experiments. We narrowed to 3, and they're going up to space this year. So maybe hope something will come out for all of us. It's not something for Target. We're doing it for everybody here.
But that's fantastic to hear, and it's good to have another moonshot project.
Yeah, exactly.
So I like that. I like that spirit. Very good. Marie-Claire, we hear a lot about sort of circular economy, closed-loop fashion systems. You have joined up with Ellen MacArthur on her initiative as well. Tell us a bit how this is laid out in Kering, what your priorities are.
First, I think, and we had previously this kind of discussion, we can all agree that circular economy for the fashion industry and for the textile industry is really the holy grail. So it's something where we have to push, because I'm really convinced, and we are really convinced, that we have to move from a linear model to a circular model where we don't use any new resource, where we don't produce any new waste. So I think it's our target to have in mind to do circular economy. So the vision is clear. After, if we want really not only to speak, but to have concrete things and above all concrete results, I think that together we have to put at the top of our priorities in the agenda, because it needs a lot of efforts. It needs a lot of people working on it, not only with experts, but NGOs, startups. When you think about circular economy, it's also linked with innovation. And our way of thinking about it, it will take time. It will take time because you need to find a scalable innovation. Right. You need to build a consensus about it, and sometimes we know that it's not so easy. And after, you have to bring on the market to be sure that it will be also economically viable. So you see, it takes time. After, as Kering, what we do, and we did it with H&M, we invest in 2013 in a startup called Worn Again. And we can say that it's really the kind of holy grail, because you go until the fiber. So very quickly, with all fabrics, with all textile, you are able to do a new fiber. So you have really a 360 approach. So when it works operationally, it makes really a revolution. But again, it needs time. We are also working through plug-and-play fashion for good. So you know it's many startups. So sometimes they could, and perhaps in the future we have some proposal linked with circular economy. And of course, as you mentioned, we have also joined specific experts like Ellen MacArthur Foundation, but also Positive Fashion, because we need really to have all the ecosystem involved in this spirit. So for me, circular economy, it's really a win-win approach, but we have to be conscious that it will take time. So I think, as we are doing also with this summit, it's really great to put at the top of the priority. It has to be one of the priority among the priority if we want really to change the things.
Yeah, I think in a way, those 4 topics that we put on the longer term side of the agenda, they're all moonshots. I mean, we don't have the solution for any of them. sort of at this point in time perfectly. I mean, so on the sustainable materials, we know a bit, but we don't have enough yet, and we don't apply. But the others, we don't know how the final solutions will look like. And that's sort of, I think we should admit that openly. That's why the most sophisticated players as well sort of hopefully put their efforts on those, and the rest who get started should focus on the short-term sort of aspects. Talking about one of the difficult ones, wages, Anna, tell us a bit your experience and sort of the perspective on the wages.
Yes, I think, I mean, as you say, this is really one of the moonshot topics. And I think in my role, one of the most common questions I get is, why don't you just pay more? And I think that's really the quest of finding a very simple answer to a really complex question. And to be honest, if it was that simple, we would have done it. But that's not really how it works. I think, I mean, most of you are here know what the fashion industry looks like and how things are being produced. And you know that we work with suppliers. They also produce for other brands. So I think when we want to address this issue, we can't just look at our small part in one factory. We need to look at the full system, because otherwise you will have a very unsustainable solutions where some workers are getting paid more or less depending on what brand they are producing for, and that's simply not what we think is a long-term solution. Instead, we want to set up something that's sustainable, that really works, and that really also builds on the mechanisms that exist in the markets where we are. So about 5 years ago, we set up what we call a fair living wage strategy. That was kind of our response to try to find that very sustainable solution. And it's really much about addressing what you can do within the factory walls as well as outside the factory walls. And I mean, what you can do within the factory walls is really making sure that you have proper wage mechanisms, things that make sure that workers are being paid according to the skills, experience, performance, and so on, that you have the wages reviewed on a regular basis and so forth. And we have started to implement that in a number of factories within our supply chain, and we can see some really great results already. So that work is paying off. But this is not a solution that you can only find or do within a factory. You need to go beyond and look at the structure, the industry, and make sure that what you create is not just islands of positive performance, but rather a level playing field where you don't compete on workers' wages. So that's why we are also working a lot in collaboration with others, because that's what's needed, not just with other brands, but with other industry actors like global trade associations, like with governments and civil society and so on. And one of the ones I would like to lift out is ACT. I think most of you know about that, and those of you who were in the wage session yesterday also learned about ACT, but that's a coalition of around, I think it's 17 or 18 brands by now that have joined forces to really address the issue of wages in a common way. And it's really sort of based on the key structures that you need to change, both in terms of purchasing practices, as well as how you can create industry-wide collective bargaining agreements. Because if you can do that, you can really create a level playing field for wages. So I think the combination of working within the factories as well as outside the factories really tries to sort of address and create a solution to this epic challenge. But I mean, once again, I think that to us, this has just been the beginning of a journey. We have set some bold goals for 2018. I know we're going to reach them, but that's only some milestones on a much longer path. And in the end of the day, I mean, this really requires the collaboration of everyone in the industry. But what I think is really positive is to see that, I mean, a couple of years ago when the issue of wages was being brought up in this forum and others, the conversation was quite different compared to now. Now I think it is much more focused on the how, on finding solutions, on the right mechanism for collaboration. It's not just about the definition of what a living wage is. And I think that really shows the journey that not just we, but the whole industry has done during the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Anna. I think the way that you explain it explains as well that it's not so easy as it is always said. Yeah? It's a very, very complex topic. We have discussed it with the strategic partners several times, this topic. And sort of if the solution would be easy, if the problem would be easy, the solution would be easy. But the problem is a very complex one, and thanks. I think you explained that wonderfully. I think the next topic, our fourth industrial revolution, say, is one that we could probably have another panel on, or we stay for the evening. Maybe Rick, you give up your perspective on what is happening there. What are the themes out there, and where is Li Fung on that journey at this point in time?
Yeah, I actually think it's maybe the most exciting part of the whole discussion, not just in terms of these discussions, but specifically for sustainability, the ability, the technology that is now being begun to be deployed, the digitalization of supply chains, and ultimately the tools that go along the supply chain from end to end. Right now, there's a lot of focus on consumer digitalization. We're focusing our attention now on the production digitalization. And that's everything from design to shipping, I would say ex-factory, right? And that whole chain gets digitalized. It allows us to do the one thing that I think holds a lot of our big initiatives back, and that's scalability. So when we start talking about traceability and we talk about transparency, we know that in a very narrow scope we can go out and we can do that in a product category for a brand, for a group of factories. But when you start talking about it across an entire supply chain, it's a very difficult process. And I think what you're calling the fourth revolution, which is really the ability to go from an analog business that was cost-driven to a demand-based supply chain that is now data-driven, is going to allow us to do a lot more with what we have. Just things, I think Spencer Fung mentioned it earlier, just the beginning of using 3D virtual design at the beginning of the process has such a dramatic impact, not just on speed and not just on cost, but if you think about the number of samples that are produced and the amount of work and the time and the energy and the courier cost and the space that's taken up by that process, right? It's massive. And so you have a Tommy Hilfiger in Europe and now I think Hugo Boss declaring that this fall they don't have a single salesman sample in a single showroom. I mean, I think that is a massive new change, and we're focusing a lot of attention on that, as I think other folks are doing too. And that's just the beginning. That's a piece, right? It may take speed down to thinking about designing a season in days or hours or weeks instead of months, but it has a massive impact in terms of what we're all talking about in terms of the environment. The next steps of being able to actually use sensors and new technologies to begin to trace back product and materials into the supply chain, but to be able to then track them through blockchain technologies and the new supply chain technologies that allow you to trace will give us the ability to make a decision on an implementation of a particular project and do it on a massive scale. And I think that's the one thing that's been missing from our industry. We don't have the ability to scale a lot of the really good ideas. And so you get to a point where you do something, you do it well, you're in 100 factories with it, and it's working. And your next question is, okay, how do I take it to 1,000 factories, my whole supply chain? And it starts to break down because it becomes massive. So I think I guess the fourth revolution, I would put actually in the other column almost. I think it's happening. It's not something that has to be looked at down the road. I think companies will address it in different ways and in different periods. But if I were to look out as early as 2 or 3 years from today, on things like 3D virtual design, 80% of the market could be using it. And that has massive kinds of impact on where we could all go. And so I think the revolution is happening. I don't think it's something that we have to think about in the future. I think it's here.
So we will definitely be revolutionized. It's only the question who is first and how quickly.
No, and then how does the industry, again, because it's a capital intense project to do these things. And so once again, the bigger companies will have the resources to be able to do it. The issue becomes, how do you then move that to the SMEs and the rest of the industry so that it becomes an industrial movement and not just a movement of those companies that can afford to actually put the resources behind it.
One thing I'd add really quickly on that is, in addition to speed, as you think about 3D design, which is something we're aggressively pursuing, it takes weeks out of the calendar, which will allow us to make better decisions closer in. And that should help on the back end. It will help with sales predictability, inventory levels. And so some of the waste that we hear about is due to salvage or product that is unwanted at the end of the cycle. And so that's one of the reasons why we're really going after speed and raw material positioning and cutting orders a lot closer in so that we can get those inventory levels right and try to eliminate waste at the backside.
Yeah. I've been told that our participants from the Youth Fashion Summit actually have 1 or 2 questions for us. Where are you? Where are you? Here. You're up here? Can we get some light on you? You have a microphone? Wonderful. Yep. Please.
Hi, I'm Akshi from London College of Fashion and this year's Youth Fashion Summit. My question is actually around the social dialogue that Ms. Anna previously mentioned. So around 80% of the fashion industry is functioning in the developing part of the world. We sit here today in the secure environment discussing the challenges in the value chain around working conditions and fair wages, far removed from reality. My question here is, how do we take into account these voices from across the world beyond hierarchy and management barriers? How do we ensure the inclusion and therefore integration of the global participants of the value chain to formulate a truly global agenda?
I realize I'm always too gentle with my questions. So
no need now.
No, but thank you for that question. I know it was directed to the full group, of course, but I think it's a brilliant one. It connects a lot to what I was talking about before. I mean, of course, putting the worker at the center. How do you make sure that whatever working environment they are working in is actually connected to their needs and their wishes and their demands and so on? So I think the work that we and many others are doing around social dialogue is for sure a vehicle towards that. But then I think if you lift that from like the individual factories and the worker perspective, I think it also has to do with how we build the future supply chains, really, and how we involve the different actors across that board. I think that colonial sourcing, as we have seen it before, is dead. I mean, that's not how supply chains will be built in the future. I think it will be all about collaboration and co-creation. And I mean, looking at how we are working, the suppliers that are in our supply chain are those that we have worked with for 20 or 30 years. They grow together with us, and we develop supply chains together with them, really looking into what are the issues and challenges that we have, and what would, with their response, what would the actors around them think would be a good solution towards that. So I think that we're moving much more towards that type of co-creation and collaboration than what we have done before.
We don't have time for a second question, but we make time. So I think you had a second one.
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline, and I'm from ESPM in Brazil, and also part of the Youth Fashion Summit.
I'm Arden. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin. I'm also part of the Youth Fashion Summit.
So we've been looking into data, and the numbers, I have to say, are very scary. According to the Environmental Protection Agency, 15.1 million tons of textile waste was generated only in 2013, of which 12.8 million tons were discarded. In 2018, we still see the unsustainable acceleration of consumption and, therefore, excessive waste, with absolutely no end in sight. Each company in this room is directly responsible for the waste created, and each company must be held responsible for solutions. The current fast fashion model is antiquated when we look at creating a more sustainable future. Your company needs to disrupt the endless cycle of overproduction, overconsumption, and ultimately minimize the waste that has been created at every second.
As strong influencers for a responsible, waste-conscious future, we need you to commit to innovating a futuristic business model in which overconsumption, overproduction, and waste is addressed. We cannot wait any longer to enact tangible change. Which one of you will take this risk, and what will your commitment be? Thank you.
If I look at the screen, time is up, but I think we need an answer.
You want me to give it part of a shot?
Yeah.
It's a very good question, but a really hard question. Yeah. And I think it's a very tough question, but actually I can say the following. I think the things that we talked about in terms of change of purchase practice, compression of the time of the decision-making process, is going to have a really profound effect on the amount of goods that are produced. And we don't have a lot of time, but let me just take you a step back. Supply chains for the last 20 years have really been built around cost. I mean, that's been the prime motivator of moving apparel around the world. At one point it was quota, but that was a cost issue. So we moved to all these different countries. But on the retail side and the consumer side, we also got to a point where margins were raised so high that no one ever wanted to be out of stock. Because why would you want to be out of stock if you can get the full margin on the goods? And so the whole supply chain was built for big quantities a few times a year to big buyers, and it created a glut of product because the markdowns were affordable. You could mark something down 20 or 30% and still be profitable on the product you had. So you could move. And so the idea was you never wanted to be out of stock. None of us wanted to be out of stock. And I think that's gone today. Consumers actually are demanding now that you can be out of stock. They want to move quick. They buy smaller quantities. Every one of our customers, our big customers and our smaller customers, have lowered the quantity per SKU that they've been buying for the last 3 or 4 years. And I think that's going to continue. And people will have less inventory. And if there's less inventory, there'll be less waste. Now, it doesn't address the circular portion of this, because that is a moonshot. That's the goal that we're working for. But it can have a dramatic impact on the amount of waste that's actually created if we build a supply chain to what consumers want instead of what we think they want, and use the technologies that will allow us to be able to run our businesses that way.
Well said.
Thank you. Thanks very much for sort of all of your contributions. We could go on forever, but then they probably carry us out here. It's always a pleasure to learn from your insights and experiences. So thanks for sharing. Thanks for staying up, and thanks for keeping up the energy Youth Fashion Summit sort of here with us. And have a good evening. And